Carl Jung once said that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But what he didn't tell you is how to use that understanding as a weapon of transformation. Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal about the psychology of silence will change how you handle disrespect forever. When someone disrespects you, your first instinct screams for confrontation. You want to make them understand, maybe even teach them a lesson. But according to Carl Jung's groundbreaking work on human psychology, the most powerful move isn't in what you say, it's in what you strategically take away. And by the end of this, you'll understand why silence has become the ultimate psychological warfare. Here's something most people never realize about disrespectful behavior, and Carl Jung discovered this through decades of studying the human psyche. When you withdraw access to your time, energy, and presence, you're not just sending a message. You're activating what Jung called the shadow, that hidden part of their personality they don't want to face. People who disrespect you operate from a place of psychological comfort. They assume you'll still be there, tolerating their behavior because your kindness keeps you around. Jung identified this as projection. They're projecting their own insecurities onto you, expecting you to carry the emotional burden of their dysfunction. But here's where it gets interesting, and why you need to pay attention to every word I'm saying next. When you stop answering their calls, stop replying to their messages, stop showing up where you used to, you create what Jung called active imagination in their minds. Suddenly, they're left talking to an echo, trying to figure out what went wrong. That confusion isn't random, it's their psyche beginning to confront the shadow they've been avoiding. Carl Jung discovered something profound about human nature that will blow your mind. He said, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But what happens when one substance suddenly disappears? There's a unique psychological discomfort that comes from being shut out without explanation. Jung called this individuation, the process where a person is forced to confront their authentic self. Your absence becomes a mirror, reflecting back their behavior without the distraction of your emotional reaction. And this is crucial, so don't skip ahead, because this reflection process is far more effective than any argument you could have had. Why? Because it makes them confront themselves. Jung understood that real change only happens through self-confrontation, not external pressure. According to Carl Jung's research on psychological dynamics, withdrawing access doesn't mean you're being passive. It means you're choosing what he called conscious suffering over pointless confrontation. You've realized that your time and energy are too valuable to spend on someone who doesn't see your worth. Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. When you protect yourself instead of punishing them, you're engaging in this sacred process of becoming. And here's the psychological twist that changes everything. The more you focus on your own psychological space, what Jung termed the inner work, the more powerful you become in their eyes. At first, they may think you're just being distant. They might assume you'll come back like you always did. But as Carl Jung discovered in his clinical practice, the human psyche can't ignore persistent absence. Days turn into weeks, and the silence grows heavier. They notice your glow returning, your focus shifting, your energy no longer orbiting around them. That's when what Jung called the transcendent function activates. The moment when they realize they've lost access to you not because you made a scene, but because you made a psychological decision. Here's something Carl Jung observed that will change your perspective forever. He said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But what's even more terrifying for those who disrespected you? Watching you accept yourself completely while they remain stuck in their psychological patterns. There's something incredibly powerful about transforming in silence. When you begin to level up without broadcasting every step, you shift the energy around you according to Jung's principles of psychological transformation. While others are watching for a reaction, waiting to see if you'll break or lash out, you're building quietly, consistently, behind the scenes. And nothing, and I mean nothing, creates more regret in someone who disrespected you than realizing they underestimated what Jung called your self-actualization process. They watch you rise without ever acknowledging them, and that's when their shadow work begins involuntarily. Carl Jung discovered that the human mind craves predictability and patterns. But real psychological power comes from what he termed controlled chaos, the ability to become unpredictable in your responses while maintaining inner harmony. The mistake many people make is assuming you need to announce your growth. They think success is only real when it's posted, spoken about, or proven. But Jung understood that real psychological development doesn't need validation. It doesn't ask for attention. It simply happens through what he called active imagination and inner work. When you begin to level up mentally, emotionally, financially, or spiritually without making noise, you gain what Jung identified as psychological advantage. You become unpredictable. They can't gauge your moves, and that mystery becomes psychologically intimidating. While they're still stuck in what Jung called unconscious patterns, gossiping, doubting, trying to provoke you, you're shifting gears. You're investing in yourself, reading more, moving differently, choosing your peace over petty conversations. Here's where Carl Jung's psychology gets absolutely fascinating, and why you need to understand this next part completely. Suddenly, you're not replying like you used to. You're not explaining yourself, not attending every argument you're invited to. That's what makes people take a second look, not your words, but your evolution. And according to Jung, this evolution triggers what he called the anima/animus projection. They begin to see qualities in you they didn't recognize before. The beauty of it? You don't have to seek revenge. Your psychological growth becomes the message. It tells them, you never broke me. You just reminded me who I am. Every silent step you take toward your purpose, every goal you accomplish without their knowledge, every inner battle you win, it becomes part of what Jung called the hero's journey they never saw coming. They thought you'd stay stuck. They thought you needed their validation. They thought their disrespect would define you. But your silence proved what Carl Jung always maintained, that the psyche has an incredible capacity for self-healing and transformation when given the right conditions. Carl Jung once observed, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." And staying calm in the face of disrespect is one of the most powerful psychological choices you can make. It's not weakness, it's what Jung called conscious control. When someone disrespects you, they often expect an emotional reaction according to Jung's research on psychological triggers. They want you to get angry, to raise your voice, to argue back. They want to see you lose your composure because it gives them psychological power. But when you remain composed, when you choose silence over shouting and peace over chaos, you completely shift what Jung identified as the power dynamic. You deny them the satisfaction of seeing you unravel. And here's what's psychologically brilliant about this approach: composure isn't about suppressing your feelings. According to Jung, it's about mastering them through what he called conscious integration. One of Carl Jung's most profound discoveries was about psychological boundaries. He said, knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. But what he discovered next will change how you set boundaries forever. The most powerful form of self-respect is setting boundaries without needing to explain them. When someone disrespects you, the first instinct might be to justify why their behavior hurt you. But true psychological strength lies in what Jung called sovereign enforcement. protecting your boundaries silently, without begging for understanding. You don't need to slam doors or raise your voice. All it takes is what Jung identified as a quiet shift in consciousness. You stop replying to messages that drain you. You stop saying yes when you mean no. You stop showing up for people who only call when they need something. At first, they might not even realize what's happening. But slowly, the access they once had to you begins to disappear, not out of spite, but out of what Jung called psychological self-preservation. Here's something Carl Jung understood about human nature that most people miss entirely. He said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But he also discovered that there's a certain psychological calm in choosing not to seek revenge, not because you're weak, but because you understand something deeper. Life has a way of settling psychological scores better than you ever could. Jung called this synchronicity, the meaningful coincidences that occur when you align with your authentic self rather than reacting from your wounded ego. Revenge often keeps you psychologically tied to the very person who wronged you. It drains your energy, clouds your vision, and keeps your emotions stuck in what Jung termed the past-oriented shadow. But when you let go of the need to retaliate and instead invest that energy into becoming a better version of yourself, you break the psychological cycle. Sometimes the most powerful psychological move you can make is to simply disappear, not out of weakness, not out of defeat, but out of what Carl Jung called conscious choice and self-respect. When someone disrespects you repeatedly, they expect you to stay. They expect you to keep showing up, to keep giving them access, to continue tolerating their behavior. But when you choose to walk away quietly, to remove yourself without warning, your absence becomes what Jung identified as a louder psychological message than your presence ever was. And in that silence, they begin to feel the loss they didn't think was possible. Disappearing with dignity isn't about ghosting or being petty. According to Jung's research on psychological health, it's about reclaiming your energy. It means you've reached a point where you no longer see value in proving your worth to those who fail to recognize it. You stop engaging in meaningless conversations. You stop waiting for apologies. You stop trying to fix what you didn't break. Instead, you exit with what Jung called individuated grace, no drama, no final words, no explanation. Just gone. And that kind of disappearance is psychologically haunting. Why? Because it forces people to sit with their own actions without your emotional reaction to distract them. Carl Jung discovered that this type of forced self-confrontation is one of the most powerful catalysts for psychological change. They begin to realize that your presence was never something they were entitled to, it was a gift. And they lost it through their own unconscious behavior. As time passes, they might try to reach out. They might wonder why you pulled away. But by then, you've evolved into someone who practices what Jung called psychological sovereignty, someone who no longer needs closure from the same people who caused the damage. Hook 24, closing, your disappearance wasn't to punish them, it was to protect you. And as Carl Jung always maintained, the most powerful relationship you will ever have is the relationship with yourself. When you walk away from what drains you, you make room for what uplifts you. Those who once disrespected you will watch from a distance as you thrive without them. That realization hits harder than any argument, any clapback, any dramatic confrontation. Because long after you're gone, they'll feel it, in the silence, in the space you used to fill, in the dignity you carried when you walked away. And in that space, regret will quietly settle in, exactly as Carl Jung predicted it would. So the next time someone makes the mistake of underestimating you, disrespecting your loyalty, or taking your kindness for granted, remember what Carl Jung taught us about the power of psychological transformation. Don't explain yourself. Don't fight for their attention. Just leave. And do it with such calm, such grace, that they can't stop thinking about it. Because in your silence, they'll hear everything they need to know about the person they chose to lose. Thank you so much for staying with me through this exploration. If you found value in today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who might benefit from it.